So we are in part 3 of our series, The Hard Truth. If you have not heard some of the other ones, I highly recommend you go to our website, impactchurchmd.com, and you can find our YouTube page. You can find our podcast on there. You can catch up on some of those. I love fantasy football. Who here loves fantasy football? Who here does not care about fantasy football, doesn't want to hear about it, doesn't want me to tell a story about it right now? Okay, I'm with you, but I got the mic. No. So for those of you that don't care at all, I'm going to explain this to you the way I explained it to my wife, and I'm going to ask you to be polite, like my wife is sometimes polite when I tell her about this stuff, okay? So I know most of you don't care, but the way fantasy football works is you draft a player, and you get them on your team, and then however well they do, your team does better. If they get a lot of yards, you get points for those yards, and you play against somebody else. I'm really good at it. Ask those 3 over there, because I beat all of them in our fantasy league last year, okay? So with fantasy football, the better the player does, the more points you get. And here's what happens sometimes in fantasy football. Every once in a while, somebody will get hurt. Like a player that you have will get really hurt. And sometimes it's like really hurt, like they have to bring the card out. And whenever that happens, all of us will text each other. If you have that player, like last year I had a player that got really hurt. And they all texted me and said, guess what? Your player got hurt. And then I get upset, like, he got hurt? Now my team's going to struggle because this guy got hurt. And for those of you that don't like fantasy football, you're already reading it. You're thinking, you are upset that a real person in real life got really hurt and he had to get put on a cart, and you're upset not because he got hurt, but because it affects your made-up team. That's what you're upset about? Like, yes, that's what I'm upset about, okay? Understand fantasy football is Dungeons & Dragons for jocks. That's what it is. I get it. But that happens, and you know why? Because when it's my team, it's my team. It's about me. See, there's one thing that I know that I am really good at, and maybe some of you are good at this too. There's one thing I'm really good at, and that is making everything about me. I'm really good at that. I'm really good at making everything about me, which is what we're going to talk about today. During this series called The Hard Truth, this is the thing we've been saying the whole time. Our main point we've been saying is when you ignore hard truths, you live in a nice lie. When you decide to ignore hard truths in your life because they're too hard for you, because they're challenging, because it means you have to sacrifice a little bit, because it means you have to do something, when you decide to ignore those hard truths, then you live in a nice lie. You surround yourself with stuff that's a lot easier for you, but it's not true. It's not real. It's a lie. So what we've been encouraging you to do is to challenge yourself to live in hard truths rather than to live in a nice lie. That's what we've been doing. And this me-centered mentality that a lot of us have, that actually our culture has, of putting me first, has seeped into a lot of different things. But it's really seeped into church. Church at this point has gotten to a point where it's very me-centric. It's about what I need and my wants. There's this trend that's going around that's actually kind of scary. It's called consumerism in church, where now we are seeing, and there's a lot of different reasons why people think this is happening, but we are seeing a trend of people treating the church the same way they would treat their fast food. That they are the consumer, and I'm going to go to a place that feeds my needs, and if it doesn't feed all of my needs, I will go to another place until I find one that feeds all of my needs. We're seeing that a lot. In fact, the Pew Research Center, and the Pew isn't like church pews, not like Pew. The Pew Research Center, they had a result, and they did a survey, and I found this when I was in the church planting process, because when I was planting a church, we were trying to figure out what people are looking for when it comes to church, and here's what they found, and we're going to put the quote up here, I'll read it to you. Here's what the Pew Research Center said. Fully 83% of Americans have looked for a new place of worship, say that the quality of preaching is an important role. So 83% of people that are looking for a new church says that the preaching is the main thing they're looking for. 83%, that's a lot. Nearly as many, 79%, say it was important to feel welcomed by clergy and lay leaders. 79%, that if they don't feel welcome, then it's going to be hard for them to stay. That's what they're looking for in a church. And about 3/4, 74%, say the style of worship services influence their decision. So what we see in worship influence their decision about which congregation to join. Location also factored prominently in many people's choices of congregation at 70%, and with 7 in 10 saying it was an important factor. I'm actually surprised about this number. Smaller numbers cite that the quality of children's programs, which is 56%, that matters, which I'm actually surprised it's that low. I thought it was going to be higher. But 56% of people decide whether they're going to go because of the church, because of the children's ministry. having friends or family in the congregation, or the availability of volunteering opportunities as their key decisions. So I saw this when we were getting ready to plant Impact Church. And there's a couple ways you can look at this. You can look at these stats and you can look at it one way. You can look at it as helpful. Like for me, I'm a maximizer. That's my strength. I like to take something and make it the best version of it can possibly be of that thing. I'm a maximizer. So when I see something like this, I go, okay, then we need to make sure our preaching is good. We need to make sure that our worship team is doing a great job. We need to make sure that we feel welcoming, because that's what people are looking for. And that's some of the things I think about. So if you look at it that way, this is very helpful. Or you can look at it in a different way. You can look at this and you can realize, when we become so focused on these stats as a church, as an organization, we're so focused on these stats, what tends to happen is that we develop a church in a way that will produce the most fruitful results for our organization. Okay, this is what we need. This is the way to build a big church, so we just need to make sure we do this formula, and when we do that, our organization of the church is going to be bigger. And here's the results that they found in the Pew Research Center, that if you start to focus too much on this, here's what's going to happen. People start seeing the church as a vendor of religious goods and services, primarily existing in order to serve its members. People start seeing the church as just a place they can go to get what they need out of it, as a vendor of religious goods and services, primarily existing to serve its members. Is that what church is supposed to be? Is that what we're supposed to do as church? And I have some theories on why this is starting to happen. There was a trend, and there's still a trend, of churches that make sure that churches are seeker-friendly. You ever heard that saying? I don't really love that saying, because really all churches should be trying to help people meet Jesus. But what it was is it's this trend that makes it you try to make it as cool and relevant as possible, this part, and the production value, so that way it makes it easy as possible for people to come in to church. But what happened with the seeker-friendly trend, the root of it was good, but when it's abused, it creates church shoppers. It creates people that just need to consume something in order to come. And there's nothing wrong with being a good church and putting your effort into things. It'd actually be a sin for me to be like, preaching doesn't matter, I'll just spend a couple hours to prepare a sermon. It would be a sin for us if the worship team didn't try. We need to do what we can to make it as well as possible and make the stage look there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's honoring God in order to do that. However, if our main concern is that, so that we can get more people in here, so that we can become a bigger organization, then we are not what God called us to be as a church. We are not. See, this narrative of consumption, what happens is it starts to trump the narrative that God says. God's narrative. And God's narrative says that you need to die to yourself. God's narrative says that you should practice radical discipleship. And God's narrative says that you should serve others. But when we are so focused on growing a church, it's easy for that narrative to be pushed aside. Which leads us to our hard truth today. When church is about you, it isn't about him. When church is about you, it isn't about him. So today we're going to be reading from 1 Samuel chapter 8. If you have your Bibles, you can open to 1 Samuel chapter 8. And here we see a great example of God's people making God's decision about them and not about what God wants, which we seem to see happen a lot in our churches. 1 Samuel chapter 8, we'll start verse 1. A little history here before we get into the passage. And 1 Samuel is written by a prophet named, what do you guys think? Samuel, yeah, you guys are glued in, I got you. 1 Samuel is written by a prophet named Samuel. And here, the Israelites, which were God's chosen people, those are the people that God were blessing. They freed them out of Egypt. The Israelites are now in their promised land, which they had been promised, and things are going great for the Israelites. However, the Philistines, which was another nation, they were starting to creep in to the nation of Israel. They're starting to creep into the mountains of Israel. And the Israelites are starting to become a little afraid. The Israelites were different than all their nations. All their nations, they had a king. All nations were ruled by a king, not the Israelites. The Israelites had religious leaders, but they did not have a king. The reason why is because God was their king. So God said, you do not have a king because I am your king. You don't need a king. But now these Philistines are kind of pushing in, and the Israelites are kind of getting a little nervous because they don't have a king, and all the nations have a king. The Philistine army is better organized, and they have a secret weapon called the chariots. They have chariots that they can use. So they're afraid if they come and try to battle them that the Israelites are going to fall apart because they don't have a king. Every nation has a king. We need a king. And that's where we'll pick up in 1 Samuel chapter 8. When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as judges for Israel. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second was Abijah, and they served at Beersheba. And his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So there's a dilemma here, because Samuel is a prophet. He is a leader. He's a spiritual leader that God appointed. And normally your sons would be the next ones, but problem is his sons were not good kids. They were not good sons. So they were starting to get worried because they can't take Samuel's place because Samuel's getting old. So the Israelites starting to get a little nervous. Let's continue in verse 4. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You are old," which first off, come on, be polite, right? "You are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." They're terrified. Because they're like, "Samuel, you're getting old, man. You're going to die, and all of a sudden we're not going to have a leader. We need a king. All the other nations have a king. We want a king. We need to have a king." And listen now, they respond in verse 6. "But when they said, 'Give us a king to lead us,' this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him," listen to the Lord's response here, "Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods. So they are doing to you. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly, and let them know what the king who will reign over them will do." So you know what? This is what God says. If they want to do it, let them do it. Give them a last warning, because they're going to regret this. But if they want to do it, let them do it. They're not rejecting you, Samuel. They're rejecting me. And if they really want a king so bad, let them know what's going to happen. But if they want it, let it happen. See, we believe in free will when it comes to our relationship with God, that God gives you free will, that you have a choice, that you can choose to follow him or you can choose not to follow him. And the reason why we have that choice is because it creates love. Without choice, there is no love. If my wife did not have a choice, she had to marry me and had to love me, that's not love, right? It's only love because she chose to be with me. Even when I talk about fantasy football too much, she still chose to be with me, right? So he chooses to love me, and that's what creates love. So God is not going to make you do anything. And in here, God's not going to make the Israelites do anything. You know what? If you want a king, fine. I'm going to give you one last warning, though. And let's see what happens. So Samuel goes to the Israelites and they give him a warning and says, "Hey, here's the deal. If you do this, if you want a king so bad, there's bad things going to happen to you. This king is going to reign over you. This king is going to take your kids and make them work for him. This king is going to take a lot of your crops. He's going to take a lot of your stuff and just use it for him and his friends. That's what the king's going to do. You're going to be reigning. You're going to regret it. But if you want this to happen, it can happen. But this is what's going to happen to you." He gives them a warning. Then we're going to skip down to verse 19. Here's how they respond, the Israelites. They say to Samuel, "No," they said, "we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles. No, this is what we want. I don't care about any stuff. All the nations have a king. We want a king." Verse 21. When Samuel heard all that the people said, he repeated it before the Lord. The Lord answered, "Listen to them and give them a king." So the Lord says, okay, if you want a king, you can have a king. We'll give you a king. See, God used to appoint the leaders. He appointed Moses. He appointed Aaron. He appointed Samuel. He would appoint the spiritual leaders. But these people are saying, no, we don't want you to appoint them anymore. We want to appoint them. We don't want to be like the way you want us to be. We want to be like everybody else. So we're going to do it. We want what we want, and we want a king. So they get a king. The first king they have is a guy named Saul. And if you know, if you've read the Old Testament, you know about Saul. Saul started off as a great king. He was a tall, handsome, powerful guy, because that's normally what all kings were. They were tall and they looked powerful. And the first thing he did is he helped rescue them from a military mission. Things were going great. But then the very first sign that things weren't going so great is they're about to go into military battle, and Saul is there, and before they went into military battle, what they would have to do is have a sacrifice. They would do a religious sacrifice to say, God, we're honoring you with this battle. We want you to bless us with this battle. The prophets were the only ones allowed to do it. The kings weren't supposed to do it. No one else was supposed to do it. But Saul is waiting for Samuel, and he's a little late, so he starts to go, you know what? We got to get to battle. I'm going to do it now. And Samuel shows up and goes, hey, I'm supposed to do that. That's what God says. I'm supposed to do this. And so his impatience, he felt some pressure. He felt a little bit of pressure, so he decided, I'm going to be disobedient, and he just adjusted the rules just a little bit in order to get what he wanted. That was the first sign. And the second sign, the same thing happens. There's a military campaign about to happen, and he doesn't follow God's instructions. And at this point, God says, you know what? I'm rejecting you as king. You are no longer the king. I do not honor you and bless you as king. So Saul starts to get a little jealous here. And then all of a sudden he gets really insecure. And you can't be a good leader when you're really insecure and really jealous, right? It's hard to lead. And that jealousy and that insecurity that Saul had led them to a battle that they lost to the Philistines. And not only did they lose, but he lost his life, Saul, and his son lost his life after 2 years of reigning. Only 2 years he was a king, and he lost his life. Why? Because he wasn't willing to follow God. Because he adjusted the rules a little bit. And the very thing that the Israelites were terrified of, being captive of the Philistines, happened. Why? Because they had to have it their way. That's what happened. And the Israelite nation got divided into two, the northern Israelites and the southern Israel. All because the Israelites needed it their way. Leads us to one of our main points. Whenever we make anything in our life about us and not him, then we begin to make ourselves the priority. The Israelites, they made it about them. And whenever you do that and you make it about you, then you become the priority. Then you decide, I'm going to worship me instead of the God of the universe. It's my decision. And here's the problem with that. You aren't worth worshiping. You're prideful. You are selfish. You are limited. And you are sinful. You know how I know that? Because I'm prideful. And I'm selfish. And I'm limited. And I am sinful. We aren't worth worshiping. But whenever we decide, God, I know what you say, but I'm going to ignore that for what I want, what we're saying is my will be done. Not yours, my will. And when we do that, we make ourselves our own God, and we are not worth worshiping. It leads us back to what we're talking about with church. When church is about you, it isn't about him. When you make church all about your needs, it's not about you anymore. It is about him. See, the purpose of the church is not for you to get what you want. The purpose of the church is not for your own personal preference. The purpose of your church is not to cater to every need that you have. It's not. And the purpose of church is not to tell you what you want to hear. That's not the purpose of church. That's not what it is. And when we shop for a church that fits all of those needs, fits everything that we want, when we do that, what we are doing is searching for a place that will not challenge us to grow and not challenge us to step outside of our own box. And eventually, if you find that church that is the perfect church, eventually you're going to find something that you don't like about it. And what will you do? You will go to another one that fills all of your needs. That's what happens. The purpose of the church is not to fulfill all your needs. The purpose of church is to glorify God. The purpose of church is to help people meet Jesus and help them to look more like Jesus for radical discipleship. And I'm telling you, you cannot look more like Jesus until you cut things out of your life that don't look like Jesus. And anytime you cut something out of your life, it hurts. And it's difficult. And it's hard. And if the church never challenges you to look more like Jesus, and all we do is cater to make sure you don't leave, please keep tithing, please stay with me. If we do that, then we are not the church that God calls us to be. When church is about you, it isn't about him. So, that leads us to our question, how in the world do we stop making it about us then? Because that's hard to do, because we're really good at making everything about us. How do we stop making it about us? I'm going to give you 2 ways that we do that. First, we stop relying on the church to feed you. You stop relying on the church to feed you. Stop relying on the church to feed you. It's an excuse that I've been in church world for a long time, and I've heard this said a lot, that when people leave a church, they'll say, I left because I wasn't being fed there. Now, here's what I will say. Let me say one statement before we get into this. There are times where that is a legitimate excuse. That is a legitimate reason. That you were at a church that never challenged you, that never pushed you, that never did anything, and because of that, you never were fed. There are times where that is a legitimate reason. There is. However, most of the time, that isn't. Most of the time, it is a blanket excuse to cover everything. You know what? I wasn't being fed there. You know what? I left and I wasn't being fed. See, the people who leave churches for this reason aren't leaving because there isn't spiritual food on the table. They're leaving because their agendas and their desires and their expectations aren't being fulfilled by the leadership. So we say, I'm not being fed here because the way I like to do it is not happening. I'm not being fed here. When I was a kid, my mom used to make my dinners. I didn't have to worry about dinner. My mom made it. Eventually, I got older, and I moved out. And I didn't starve. I made my own dinners. I figured out my dinners. And then I got married. When I got married, my wife, the first year specifically, she was mainly making dinners. I didn't really know how to make dinners. And she would make the dinners, but every once in a while, she would go away for a weekend. And guess what? When she was gone for the weekend, I didn't starve. Why? I fed myself. Because I'm a man. Not much of one, but I'm a man, right? I can feed myself. Imagine if my wife went away for a weekend, and I ended up passing away from starvation because I never ate. And at the funeral, they're like, why didn't he eat? Well, Erica left and didn't leave him any food. He didn't know what to do. He could not eat. You'd be like, that's ridiculous, right? Why? Because I'm a man. See, the same is true when it comes to church. There is spiritual food on the table. If you're relying on the church to feed you, and if you show up every week with a bib and not a fork, then you're in trouble. Because it's not our job to feed you. It's our job to try to make it as an environment where we can challenge you, and we want to do certain things to help you with that. We want to give you ways to serve. We want to give you groups you can join. There's nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the day, when you die and go to heaven, you can't say, God, I'm sorry I went to a church and never fed me. Like, you have a Bible. You could have fed yourself. See, it's not our job to feed you. It's not our job. So if we want to stop making church about us, we need to stop relying on the church to feed us. We need to dig into our Bibles in our own way. We need to find ways that we can grow in our own walk. That's what we need to do. Stop relying on the church to feed you. And then number 2, we need to start living in harmony with God. That's what we're called to do. We need to start living in harmony with God. I want to give you a little illustration here. I have some of the worship team here coming up. I want to show you guys. Some of you guys aren't musically talented. I get it. So you don't really understand what harmony is. Some of you guys have trouble with harmony. So I wanted to demonstrate to you what harmony looked like with 3 people that could really sing really well. So Kimmy, could you show us really quick? Here, you can step up here. Can you show us what a melody is? So one part melody.
Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear.
We can all do that. I'm joking. So now I want you, all 3 of you to show us a 3-part melody. So what if all 3 of you are singing the melody, what that would sound like. So why don't we show?
Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear.
Okay, not bad, right? Sounds pretty good, right? We're all with that. Now let's try a 3-part harmony. Let's see what the difference is between a melody and a harmony. So a 3-part harmony this time. Go ahead.
Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear.
See how much better that sounds when they sing different parts? Now let's try a 4-part harmony, okay? So go ahead, Kimmy, lead us off.
Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear.
So you see how it's a little different, huh? The problem was, Frank, you were a little sharp, okay? Kimmy, you need to be more on time, and come on, you're a little flat there, okay? So that's what happens a lot. We enter into a church, and we enter a new church, and everyone's trying to sing in harmony with the angels. It's trying to sing with harmony with God, and we enter into a church, and we come in not in harmony at all. And we go, the problem is the preaching. You know what the problem is about this church? It's Frank. He only picks Hillsong. I want other songs, right? You know what the problem is about that church? They don't do meet and greet. Where's meet and greet? How am I going to know anybody if no one ever gives me an opportunity, there's 30 seconds of awkwardness for you to meet somebody, right? Right? Like, we think that's the problem. And we go in, and they would say, we're not the problem, you're the problem. Instead of coming in humbly under a spiritual authority and saying, I want to learn from you how I can be in harmony with you and with the angels, we say, no, this is how it's supposed to be done. Everyone else is wrong. I'm right. This is how it's supposed to be done. Or here's another way that we mess up the harmony. Let's do it one more time. Go ahead, Kim, you can start us off.
Jesus, Jesus, you
He
make
is
the
so,
darkness
so beautiful.
tremble.
Eric,
Jesus, your
He
silence
is the best.
fear.
Thank you guys. You guys have a seat. Thank you guys so much. Round of applause. We also do that too, don't we? We come in and we start singing about us. Like, no, this is what I want to do. This is what I think should happen. We do that, don't we? And what we're doing is we're saying we're not willing to be in harmony. Right now in Revelation it says that there is a host of angels at the throne singing, holy, holy, holy. And our job is to be in harmony with that. That's what we're supposed to do. But sometimes we come in and we make it about us. We start singing our name. Then we go, what's everyone's problem? This is what we should be doing. Church isn't about you. It's not. This is about singing with the heavenly host to the God of the universe who loved you so much that he sent his son to die for you. That's what this is about. It's helping people that are out there that don't know that to learn about that. That is what it is about. And when church is about you, it isn't about him. Now, I've been talking to you mainly about this, but this hard truth, if there's any hard truth that is the hardest for me, it's this one, especially in the position I'm in. I'm in a position where I'm obviously in leadership here, like what I do changes a lot of things. I understand that. And it can be really hard for me not to make church about me. In fact, more than any of you, it's probably even harder for me to not make church about me. It's really easy for me to do that. Just this past Thursday, I was at a preaching cohort with 15 to 20 different pastors in our state, just learning how to become better preachers. And while I was there, I've started to grow relationships with some of these people I never met before. And one of the guys asked me, hey, so you've been at church for 6 months. What's like the biggest challenge for you? And it was easy. The biggest challenge for me is not making it about me. Because if I'm going to be completely honest and vulnerable with you guys, I feel better about myself when more people are here. And it's not because I feel like, oh, we're honoring God more. A lot of times I feel that way because I feel like I'm doing a better job. And when less people are here or tithes aren't as much as we want it to be, I feel like I'm doing a bad job. It's easy for me to put numbers and say that is how good of a person I'm doing. Know what I'm doing? I'm making it about me. Whatever I want. And it's an insecurity of mine that I need to work through. I have people in my life that when I start talking about numbers too much, they call me out. My wife is really good at it. She says, hey, it doesn't matter. That's not the point. Are we a church so we can build a mega church and you can be a celebrity? Or are we a church so we can honor God with people that we were given? That God has blessed us with this amount of people. How are we going to use this amount of people and help you look more like Jesus and help me look more like Jesus? And we can sing in harmony with the heavenly host. How do we do that? But it's hard for me. This is hard for me to do. And I heard a great analogy that I'm going to tell you guys from Francis Chan. I don't know if you guys ever heard Francis Chan. He wrote a book called Letters to the Church. I highly recommend this book. It is the most challenging book I've ever read. It made me think I need to quit being a pastor a lot of times because it's just so convicting. So if you want to convict yourself. And here's the analogy he gave, and I'll give it to you guys. He said, imagine you go to your kid. They're a little older. Maybe you have a teenager. Or imagine Brooklyn's a teenager. And I say, hey, Brooklyn, for your birthday's coming up, you can have anyone you want to come over to our house. I'll buy some pizza, but we're not doing anything special, okay? Nothing special, nothing crazy. Whoever you want can come over and spend time with you. How many people do you think would come? I don't know, like 5, 6 people maybe. Maybe my closest friends will come. Okay, cool. Now let's say, Brooklyn, instead of that, I rented out Dave & Buster's for you. And I made sure that anyone could play any games they wanted, all the food they wanted, everything there was free for them, and you can invite anybody you wanted to invite. How many people do you think would come? You would say, well, probably my whole school would come. Like everyone would come to that. Okay, so let's say we do that. And your whole school comes to Dave & Buster's for your birthday, and I go over to you and I say, look, Brooklyn, look how many people love you because they came here for your birthday. Would she say, yeah, they all love me? Would she say, they don't love me. They're only here for the show. They're only here because if these did it in my house, no one would come. They don't love me. And I think sometimes at church this is what we do. That we think if we have enough production and enough people are coming, we go, God, look how great we're doing. And God would say, if you take the show away, are they still going to show up? Will they? Because let me tell you something. If I had enough money, if we had enough people that gave me money and enough leaders here, we could build a mega church. There are churches that use the mega church formula. There's a formula. I'm not joking. You have enough money, you have enough advertising, you can build it. But do you think that's really what's honoring to God? My prayer since we've started, and I want this to be your prayer. If we ever make Impact Church about us, my prayer is that God shuts us down. Can't be about us. We're not worth worshiping. We're not. What we're trying to do is help people who don't know Jesus to meet Jesus and help people that already know Jesus to look more like Jesus. That includes me. So we have to understand when church is about you, it isn't about him. We're not worth worshiping. I don't want to build a church that is catering to all of our own needs. We're going to do things and try to be as effective as possible. At the end of the day, our ultimate goal is not to make you happy. Our ultimate goal is to make him happy. That's our goal. And there's going to be times where we might do things that are going to rub you the wrong way. There's times where I do things that rub him the wrong way. It's true. You want to tell him? Just kidding. Don't tell him. It happens. That's part of it. Because we are a bunch of sinners. We are a bunch of beggars trying to show other people where they can find bread. That's what we're doing. And God has blessed us with everyone that's here. Our goal is to make it about him and to join in harmony with the heavenly host. When church is about us, it's not about him. And we pray. Dear God, I just thank you for being a God who's willing to give us free will and willing to give us choice. And at times we choose to follow your path, and at times we choose not to. God, I just pray for everyone that's here. I pray for the leadership here. I pray for the owners here. I just pray that you help us to change our hearts. Because all of us have the natural inclination to do this, especially me. God, convict us where we need to be convicted. Speak to us where we need to be spoken to. God, I just pray that we make our life about you and we make church about you. That we don't come in here with a list of things that we need met. We don't come here with a bib expecting the church to feed us. But we come in here humbly, under your authority, to join the heavenly host, singing, Holy, Holy, Holy. And help us to look more like you. Help us to be willing to take challenging messages and apply them. And thank you for being the God that even when we are selfish, even when we care only about ourselves, that you still love us. That we can never run too far from your grace. Thank you for being the God that loves us so much that you sent your son for us. You are deserving of our worship. Help us to humbly approach you and to remind ourselves it's all about you. We love you, we praise you. In your son's name, amen. We're going to sing this closing song, and I want to invite you and